So to start this whole thing off, my question is, why are our shoes off?
So this is this rug here is not from the 18th century, but it is still quite an old rug. I believe it's like late 19th century. So just so that our shoes don't damage the rug at all, it's a little bit better for the condition of the rug.
Awesome. So we've got a century-old rug in here, and so it's don't walk on the rug unless your shoes are off, which of course you're not going to be taking. This is just a special thing.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, so to take us around the room a little bit and what life would have been like in the 18th century, both for George Washington and in general for a wealthy family like the Dyes, or like for most folks even in the 18th century. Of course, in a bedroom, you typically have a bed like this. This is a rope bed. Most beds in the 18th century would have been a rope bed like this. Normally, you would, of course, still have a mattress and bedding on top. But what I like about the fact that we don't have that here right now is you can see how a rope bed like this would be constructed. So you'd have, instead of a box spring, you'd have ropes like these holding up your mattress. But you'll notice these ropes are kind of loose at the moment. So if you were to put a mattress on top and lay down, you would sink in and hurt your back, and it's not really comfortable. So every so often before you go to bed, you'd have to tighten the ropes, and you would use a bed key like that. So you'll notice that there is a wooden tool lying on the ropes over there. That is a bed key, so you would use it to twist and tighten the ropes every so often, not necessarily every night. But once the ropes loosen a bit, you would tighten the ropes. And that is in fact where we get the saying sleep tight from, because you still literally have to tighten your bed before you go to sleep. Yes.
Get out. Good night, sleep tight,
Yeah.
and don't let the bed bugs bite, because
Yes.
that was an issue as well.
Exactly, yes. It's not necessarily the same kind of bed bugs you get nowadays, although I'm sure they did have those in the 18th century as well. But the mattress you're sleeping on is not a nice memory foam or spring mattress that we get nowadays. It's stuff with hay, horsehair, things coming from outside. So you're probably bringing bugs with you. And not little bed bugs like we occasionally get nowadays, but ants, spiders, wasps, nasty things that you don't want to be sleeping on, hence don't let them
Don't let the wasps swarm. Good gracious. And George Washington, is this the frame?
No, this is not a bed that was originally here in the 18th century. So the Dey family sold their home in 1801, a few decades after the war, and it was given to them to do when they moved. They took most of their belongings with them. So a lot of the artifacts we have on display here at Dey Mansion, Washington's headquarters, are 18th century artifacts, but not from this home originally.
Okay.
So this is the room that Washington slept in, but it is not the bed that he slept in. But it's the kind.
But this was his room.
Exactly. This was the room that he would have been sleeping in.
Awesome. So posters of his favorite bands would have been up in here.
Most likely. He would be traveling with some of his possessions, but I don't know how much decoration he would have been doing. And another thing that people tend to do on a daily basis is we have running water in our homes nowadays. We have bathrooms that we go to. They didn't have that in the 18th century. So a lot of what we do in the bathroom, they do in the bedroom. So one of the things that most people do in the bathroom is they go to the bathroom.
Do it one moment, hang on to your mic.
Yes,
I know what you're reaching for.
Yes. So this object here is a chamber pot. I'll show that off to the folks at home. So this is a chamber pot. This is one of two places the Dey family, or really any family in the 18th century, would go to the bathroom. They also have a privy outside, which if you folks had seen our tour of the gardens, that was last month. Yes, last month. We do have the remains of the privy out in the garden, so if you ever stop by Dey Mansion, you can check that out as well. The privy is basically like an outhouse, a place outside where you can go to the bathroom, but you're only going to use it during the day when it's warm and sunny out.
In the middle of the night, you don't want to go.
Exactly. In the middle of the night, or if it's cold or rainy, you're not going all the way outside to go to the bathroom. So that's mostly what a chamber pot would be used for in the 18th century.
So how old is this one?
I'm not entirely certain specifically this chamber pot of the age of this one. I think it's probably 19th century.
Okay.
And the Dey family would have had a more decorated chamber pot than this, and they also very often had lids so that you don't smell them constantly in the middle.
Spill. You don't want to spill.
Yes, and that was actually a problem in the 18th century. Apparently it was a common enough issue of people tripping over chamber pots that it was something that people would make jokes about in newspapers or something like that. Yeah, it was not really something we have to worry about nowadays. And chamber pots were in some ways associated with wealth. Notably, how they get clean is associated with wealth.
How so?
So in most families, like in an average or a poor family, you do still have a chamber pot, but usually it is the children who are made to clean the chamber pot, typically as a chore. Around the age of like 8 or so is when you're made to do major household chores like the cleaning of chamber pots or bringing water from the well and whatnot. But a wealthy family like the Deys would not be doing something like that, and neither would George Washington. They would typically have servants or enslaved people. And in the case of the Dey family, we do know that there were at least 3 people who were enslaved here in 1780. So they would have been the ones who would have been forced to clean the chamber pots.
Good gracious.
Yes.
Wow.
And Washington himself was also a slave owner. He had an enslaved man, William Lee. We're not entirely certain whether or not Lee was here, but Lee was Washington's his valet, correct. So he was brought along with him for most of the Revolution, so it is possible that he was here.
That is amazing.
Yes. And then so the other thing that people typically do in bathrooms is that they clean themselves. Nowadays, most people bathe or take showers. That's not really a thing in the 18th century. Showers definitely aren't a thing. Bathing is something that people do occasionally, but not very often. If you think about it, running a bath would be very difficult in the 18th century. You can't just turn on the tap and run the water. You have to bring in the water a bucket at a time from the well and then heat up a whole bathtub. And you also have to remember that, especially like in the winter, it's pretty cold. In here, people do have fireplaces, of course, but it's still going to be fairly cold. So in general, bathing like that is not really practical. But people would still stay clean. And so one of the ways that people would stay clean, you'll see over here, there is a bowl on the counter here with a towel. And they would typically have a pitcher to go along with this as well. But so this is a wash basin.
And the shaving brush.
Yes, and in fact, we actually do have Washington's shaving mug in our collection.
Really?
Yes, it's on display at our visitor center currently. So if you go to our visitor center, if you ever stop by, we do have his mug on display. It's one of our favorites.
We're going to have to check that out before we leave.
Definitely, yes. So that was actually an artifact that Washington had left here in November of 1780 that the Dey family kept as an heirloom of theirs for a while.
That's amazing. I still use one of those.
Yes. And so it's kind of similar. Both shaving and cleaning would, of course, involve soap, but probably a little bit more caustic soap than we're using nowadays. Their soap, much like modern soap, would be made of lye mixed with some kind of a fat. But lye nowadays, it's a whole chemical process. You can easily control the concentration of lye. Lye that they would be getting in the 18th century would be from ashes. From the fireplace, and you can't really control how much of that very strong base you'd be getting from the ashes, and you can't really control the specific chemical that you'd be getting. Nowadays, people typically use sodium hydroxide in the making of soap. You could use either the sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide in the 18th century because you didn't really know the difference.
So the soaps then weren't fragrant?
They could be. Very often they wouldn't be. So they could be made of lye and animal fats, but wealthy people could be buying more fragrant soaps and nicer soaps made from things like olive oil, like Castile soap, basically. And they would have all sorts of fragrances. In general, people were fairly concerned with smelling good in the 18th century. It isn't quite like today because they would be a little bit more accustomed to natural body smells than we are nowadays. But you have to remember that people in the 18th century did think that foul smells caused disease. So they were very concerned with making themselves smell good and their homes smell good for the most part. And there, of course, is some correlation between foul smells and disease. Obviously, something that is covered in like something disgusting might also cause disease, but if using perfume isn't going to prevent disease. So there's...
But they also thought, were we still in the era of the humors of the body?
To an extent, yes. So it's a combination of like, this idea of bad air. It's where the disease malaria gets its name, is literally bad air. And there's also this like idea going back to ancient Greece and Rome of humors. I mean, bloodletting was still a fairly common practice in the 18th century. It is how Washington dies, after all. But yeah, so people were very concerned with being clean, and they would use a wash basin like this. So basically, be it water, soap, a pitcher, a towel like this, and you could use the towel to clean your body a little bit at a time. And people would clean on a daily basis.
Right. Mm-hmm. I imagine this is where. Go ahead, you do it. I'm sitting here. I actually completely forgot that.
What do you think it's for?
I think it's for the wig.
That is correct. This is a wig stand, and this core portion is called a blockhead, which is a bit of an entertaining name. Wig wearing was quite common in the 18th century. A lot of upper-class men would be wearing wigs. Washington himself actually did not wear a wig, though.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. Washington, that is his natural hairstyle, but he powdered his hair. So it would have been more of a reddish-brown underneath all of that white powder. But it would have looked similar to the white powdered wigs of this time period and also helped prevent lice and whatnot.
Do we know how one would powder a wig in the 18th century?
That's a good question. So someone would have been making the wig in the first place, so likely that would be part of their trade, would be to powder the wig. In terms of a man like Washington, however, who's powdering his hair directly, I imagine that might be something that one of the duties that Lee would have been having to help maintain Washington's appearance, so he likely would have been very involved in the process of powdering Washington's hair.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yes, and so one of the other aspects of just general 18th century living is, you have to try to stay cool in the summers and warm in the winters. I mean, today is a very hot day. Unfortunately, we have an HVAC system in here.
Yes. Poor George was up on the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
Heat rises.
Yes.
And he is now here what months?
July. So he is here in July. Then he also comes back in October and November. So in October, November would have been quite a bit cooler, but he is here in July, and much like nowadays, it is quite hot in July. And they would have all had all sorts of ways that they could stay cool in the 18th century. You will notice that most of these windows do have shutters on them. So on a particularly hot day, they could close these shutters to help block out some sunlight. Get it a little bit cooler in here. And they could also just open the windows, kind of like nowadays, how you just open windows to get a little bit of a breeze. Throughout the house, there are windows and doors opposite one another that they could open up to get a little bit of a breeze. That's kind of one of the features of the Georgian architectural style, is that there's a lot of symmetry to the house, which is both aesthetic and functional.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are those shutters, are they functional, or are they now just aesthetic and they're not?
They are functional. I'm not sure if I'd be able to move these ones in particular because they tend to swell with the summer. Very old wood like this tends to, swell with the heat, so they might be stuck in place. But they do move, so they're a little bit easier to move in the winter when it's a bit colder out.
Now, I know you have other things that you want to show us, but I've got a question. So the last time
Mm-hmm.
that we had visited you, we got our own little sneak peek up here, and we discussed the paint colors.
Yes. So these paint colors should be roughly accurate to what they were at the time period. And it is somewhat surprising to people nowadays that Washington's bedroom would have been pink like this. I will say, of course, this wasn't normally Washington's bedroom. He's obviously using this during his 3 months that he's here, but this normally would have been the family's master bedroom. So Tunis and his wife Hester would have been sleeping in this room. And Hester was likely the one choosing the paint colors in the time period. One of her roles of as the woman of the house in a wealthy family like in the 18th century, she would be doing a lot of the interior decorating, including choosing the paint colors. Of course, though, pink does not have the same connotations that it would nowadays. The connotations of pink as a feminine color and blue as a masculine color really come about in the 20th century, and even then they're originally associated more with babies. So pink is a color associated with baby girls, and it's not until much later, even in the 20th century, that it starts to be seen as a feminine color generally. They would not have thought of it like that in the 18th century, and they wouldn't have even called it pink. They probably would refer to it as rose.
And because of their wealth, they were able to have
Absolutely, yes.
Paint like this.
Yes, and you'll notice if you do visit Dey Mansion, Washington's headquarters, walking from room to room, a lot of them are different colors. So this room is pink, but what would have been the men's parlor room, which would have been Washington's office during his stay, is a kind of a mustard yellow. There's kind of this grayish blue throughout most of the house, but like the women's parlor would have had more of a brighter greenish blue. So that would have very much been a show of wealth from the Dey family, that they had all these different paint colors. So as I mentioned, they had all sorts of ways of staying warm in the winters as well, which would have been important for Washington here in October and especially November. It would have gotten quite cold, and so as you might expect, they had a fireplace. People tend to associate fireplaces nowadays as kind of a luxury you might have in a living room. Pretty much every room would have to have a fireplace in the 18th century, including bedrooms like this.
Where you would freeze.
Exactly, yes.
With the wasps that were in your mattress.
Yes, probably at least fewer of them in the winter.
Yes.
So that's one of the pluses of winter, I guess. But yes, you would have a fireplace running here most of the night to help keep the room warm. But you can imagine it would still be quite cold in the room, even with a fireplace like this. It's not necessarily heating up the whole room. And so they have ways to try to keep their bed warm in particular in the 18th century. And you would use a fittingly named bed warmer, which you can see down here. This tool right next to the fireplace is with a long wooden arm and the brass bowl at the bottom. That is a bed warmer. You would take coals from the fireplace and place them in the brass portion. And you would shift it underneath your bed to get it nice and warm before you go to sleep.
And place it back, of course. You're not like
Yes,
you're not
yeah.
sleeping with this.
No, you're not supposed to leave it right underneath the bed.
Okay.
Even with placing it back, it does seem like a major fire hazard. I'm not
Terribly
certain
so.
how they prevented fires in the 18th century.
So.
Exactly. But so it's that would be one of the ways that they keep their beds warm. There are also cabinets in the side of the fireplace here, which would get pretty hot during the day and at night as the fire is running. So if you were to store your sheets in those cabinets, they would be nice and warm before you go to sleep as well.
That is clever.
Mm-hmm. And then this item, this kind of box right next to the bed warmer is a foot warmer, also pretty aptly named. The way this would work is kind of similar to the bed warmer. You would take coals from the fireplace and place them in the foot warmer. And if you were going outside in the winter, like taking a carriage ride somewhere, you would bring the foot warmer, with you and keep your feet warm on your carriage ride wherever you're going.
Get it out.
Mm-hmm.
Something for everything in the 18th century.
Exactly. Many things tend to be multi-purpose, and they had to do what they could to survive in rather cold New Jersey winters like that.
Angelo, thank you so much.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
For touring us again around Dey Mansion, Washington's headquarters, showing us where George Washington slept and shaved and kept warm in October and November.
Exactly. And try to keep cool in July.
Try to keep cool in July. And we're going to see you again next month. We're going to be back.
Yes, I look forward to it.
We just invited ourselves. we didn't even clear it whether we'll be back.
We're more than happy to have Little Falls Public Library.
Thank you so much, Angelo. And thank you, Little Falls. Keep tuning in for more fantastic episodes of Historic New Jersey, for more fantastic sites like Dey Mansion. Have a good day, Little Falls.